So when I think about a career in politics or policy, like I can't imagine I would burn out very quickly because of all the kind of heartbreaking losses that you go through and how hard it would feel to keep showing up and show up the next day. And I'm thinking especially about this story you tell early on about the rape insurance bill in Michigan. And I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah, happy to. And it's so, unfortunately, it's a story that resonates with people all across our country and feels even more, I think, important right now. So in 2013, on December 11th, and I remember the date exactly because it was my grandma Nino, who I opened the book talking about. She was a phenomenal woman. I had two great, fabulous grandmothers, Gretchen and Esther. I am Gretchen Esther Whitmer, but Esther we called Nino. She turned 100 on December 11th, 2013. Oh. And I was happy to be calling her and saying happy birthday, but it also was a really hard day for me. It was a day that in the Michigan legislature, so I was the Senate minority leader. I was the top Democrat in the state Senate, the first woman ever to lead a caucus in the Senate. And my predecessor in this job, Rick Snyder, who was the governor in Michigan back then, had vetoed legislation that would have required that women and our families pre-purchase an abortion rider in the event we ever need health care that requires abortion services. So you have to pre-plan for an unplanned event, essentially, by buying something that didn't even exist in the marketplace. It was just a cruel additional barrier between women and our ability to access the health care that we need and deserve and should be able to access. And my predecessor, to his credit, Republican governor, vetoed it. But then the legislature and a couple of interest groups used something under Michigan law, which is you can go straight to the people and collect signatures and bypass the governor altogether. You just put an issue in front of the legislature and a simple majority can change the law for everyone in the state. And a governor neither signs it nor vetoes it because they have no ability to impact the legislation. And so they were doing an end run on this Republican governor, and me, I was the Senate minority leader. It was coming up for debate on the floor. They wouldn't hold a single committee hearing. So no woman or medical professional ever had an opportunity to testify on what this new legislation and law would mean for people. And so I knew the only opportunity I would have would be at the microphone that day. I was talking to one of my colleagues who he and his wife had been desperately trying to start a family through IVF and had gone through all the treatments and had so many heartbreaking moments. And I asked him if he would share his story on the floor, thinking it might impact the Republicans who were pushing this legislation, to see a man talk about it who desperately wanted to be a parent but couldn't, and that it would impact him and his wife. They had just had a miscarriage that didn't complete at home, and they had to go to the hospital to have it completed, which we used to call a DNC. It's an abortion. We got to use the word. But I think that it could have really resonated, but it was too hard for him. He said, I can't do it. It's too emotional for me. I can't tell the story. And I was walking back to my desk, and I thought, how can I ask him to tell his story when I have a story that I'd never shared publicly? And I thought, I was debating whether or not to share that I had been raped when I was in college. And I decided, literally while I was speaking, because my name went up on the board and I had a certain amount of time in which to speak, and I went to the microphone and started giving my prepared remarks, and I thought, forget it, I'm going to tell the story. And I shared that I had been raped when I was in college, and had I become impregnated from my attacker, at least I would have known that I could make whatever decision I needed to make for me in the wake of that. And if this new law had become law, I wouldn't have, it would impact me and every woman who found herself in this situation. And the vote went up on the board, and it didn't change a single vote. Every Republican voted in favor of it, and one of my fellow Democrats did too. And I remember the board closed, and one of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle came over, and he said, I heard your remarks, and it made me think of my wife, who also was raped in college, and I wish I could have voted the way you did. And I was so mad when he said that, because I thought, how dare you come up to me and say you think I cast the right vote when you wouldn't cast it? And I left the legislature that night And I realized I needed to call my dad because he was going to see this in the news, and I had never told him. And I went home, and I had that conversation, went home, went to bed, and I woke up the next day. I was about as depressed as I've ever been because I just bared my soul to the world, and it didn't make a single bit of difference. But by the time I got to my office, and I live in East Lansing, and the capital's in Lansing, so it's like an 8-mile drive. By the time I got into the office, my staff had told me we'd been inundated with hundreds of phone calls and faxes and emails of people who thanked me for doing that and shared their stories. And it made me feel like I just did this, and it was hard, but it had value. And I tell that story because fast forward 10 years later to December 11th of 2023, as a sitting governor, never would have imagined I'd be running for governor that 10 years beforehand, but as a sitting governor and a new Democratic majority in our legislature, I got to sign the repeal of that law.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to share that story in a chapter that's called Never Give Up, because it took 10 years. It was a long, hard fight. It shouldn't have taken that long, and it's hard to believe in these moments that it does. But these fights are worth having because we can win them. And if we can win them in a state like Michigan, we can win them all across this country. And so never give up.
Love that.